Do you guys think that decentralized intelligence can actually compete with centralized providers on, let's say, the workloads, or more importantly, the word revenue? Can they compete there? Or is this a category that is going to permanently serve the long tail? What do you think?
So, I mean, Ambient is very opinionated about this, and our
I
view
know.
is that crypto AI has tried to do too much essentially, and has botched the economics as a result. And our protocol is focused on delivering one thing very well. We think there are different economic modes, but our view is that inference is an inherently profitable activity. It's profitable for all the incumbents who you could think of in the world. They're doing huge ARRs. They're capturing part of this exponential increase in inference demand. And if we just write pretty decent software, we can replicate that in a decentralized context and also create a bunch of beneficial knock on effects as a result. So I think it absolutely is going to be a thing and a category. I also believe that, and it's no offense to VCs, but I think that people really get stuck on current paradigms. And we've actually seen those current paradigms shift radically in the past few years. So one of the conversations I remember having is, there's no way that any country other than the US will release competitive models with US models. It's simply the talent density is all here, the hardware is all here. It will never happen. And I think actually Founders Fund released like a pretty long piece about that, which was widely cited. Every conversation I had for like 3 weeks after that was the "it's so over" conversation for decentralized AI. And I mean, that's obviously not the case that this was going to be, but everyone told me that was inevitable. A number of people also told me that AI was completely useless and because of hallucinations would never achieve labor substitution effects. And that is like also clearly not true. And I think the next big surprise for people, and we all have good advocates, I think, with our investors, but I think the next big surprise for people is that decentralized AI is actually a thing. There are actually huge advantages to decentralized AI in terms of not upsetting people in the community, by plopping a giant data center on their heads, like actually having useful edge compute, having real confidentiality and privacy and credible neutrality, and being able to have ownership stake and participation in the thing that you're using in a way that you can't with a privately valued or held entity. So I think it's coming, but we need to work really hard in order to bring it into the world because it is very technically challenging.
Travis, I actually have a follow-up question for you. What do you think is the honest performance gap between what you're doing with Ambient? You can run a 600 billion plus parameter model through POW at Solana, and you've gotten the verification overhead cut down to 0.1%. But what is the performance gap with that and calling, let's say, a Cloud Sonnet or a GPT 5.2? What I want to get to is, for an average developer, right, who doesn't really care, what's the point that they can actually care enough about decentralization to accept any performance trade-offs?
Well, I think the model intelligence is very close. So, we're about to upgrade to GLM 5. You can see our stats on OpenRouter. We're live on OpenRouter with GLM 4.6. We're the top provider there. We're doing about 20% of their GLM 4.6 inference. Time to first token is under 2 seconds. This is all stuff that's happening on a chain. So I think that like the ergonomics are fine. The intelligence benchmarks of the GLM series, for example, people could use other models, are very neck and neck with the current closed source solutions. And so it's just a matter of, do you want to pay like an X less in terms of the price per million tokens? Do you want to have confidentiality and privacy of your information? And do you want to avoid being rate limited excessively or risk being banned for using novel applications? And I think for a lot of people, the answer is like, hell yes. Like we would like to avoid all of those things and enjoy all of those benefits. So I think it's getting closer and closer every day. And probably everybody in this room has an attractive value proposition for different types of developers.
Right. Ben, I actually also have a very specific question to you because Gensyn is building the structural goal of Gensyn is to build decentralized ML compute, right? But what happens if there comes a time where the network hit critical mass and it undercuts, let's say, hyperscaler pricing? Now, let's just imagine they go all Rockefeller and they simply cut prices to kill the economic argument altogether. Let's say AWS or Azure. What do you think that's going to turn out? How do you think that's going to turn out?
Yeah, so I mean, in many ways, they actually do this, and this is what's played
Right.
out in the centralized markets over the past few years. It's one of the reasons we, as a network, have never launched one of these like competitive front ends where somebody can go and book time on a GPU. You could do that with decentralized compute, and you could have somebody able to come in like behind the scene. Like it looks the same as AWS, but behind the scenes, what's actually happening is you're using someone's GPU at home rather than using a data center GPU or something like that. Realistically, all you get in that case is the supply and demand cost savings of using that compute over other compute. But you also have increased costs of being able to verify that compute itself, and then you have this verification problem, et cetera, et cetera. And so we started talking about this back in 2021, but we very deliberately did not build for that case because we saw this problem that the centralized providers would be able to subsidize. They'd be able to subsidize for a frankly quite a long amount of time, and then the kind of decentralized alternative wouldn't be able to compete. The reason we did that is because we don't believe decentralized technology is best placed competing head to head with existing centralized technology, because it's typically going to be worse in those cases. What's more interesting to us as a company is what happens when you explore what you can do with decentralized technology, which is not possible in the centralized case. For us, the most interesting thing there is scale. You can reach a level of scale with decentralized tech that you just cannot reach with centralized tech, mostly because decentralized tech is a category that within it has centralized tech. So like functionally you just never can kind of get wider than it unless we end up in that like one company, one world government scenario that we described right at the beginning of this podcast, in which case, I don't know, we've got bigger problems then. So our view is basically that. It's that we should look at the areas where decentralized tech is inherently better. The other piece is our belief is that that kind of time-based purchasing of compute is necessary in the centralized world, but it isn't necessarily the most effective way of accessing compute. It's just, it's been the only way we really could make it work for the centralized markets. And so in kind of addressing the verification problem that I described, we actually built that in a task-based system. This idea that realistically, underneath everything, what is cared about is the execution of a specific model, like a set of specific steps on a GPU somewhere in the world. And humans struggle to reason about that when they're transacting with each other. And so they proxy it with time and with like specific devices and things like that. If you're building for a human, you kind of have to build in that way. You can make it task-based, but it's a bit harder to shift. If you're building for a machine, you absolutely will build in the task-based way. A machine requesting a task to be executed doesn't need to go through that whole like estimation over a specific machine and amounts of time and things like that. It can just communicate directly with the other device and request exactly what it needs. And so in that case, that's when you end up, you're building for an entirely different user, you're building for a different use case. You're not competing directly with this centralized provider because they're not looking at that specifically. They're still looking at like, how do we sell kind of time on GPUs? And so I intersected a few things there, but ultimately, I think two things are true. One is decentralization is most interesting when you apply it to a problem that only it can do. And separately, we can build for specific kind of scenarios that look a bit beyond where the current centralized markets have got to. They've grown organically into a certain place, and we can kind of slipstream around them to build for the next era, which in our mind is just vastly more automation and more machine interaction. I think just to your previous question as well, we talked a little bit about how like decentralized AI has progressed and it obviously made all these promises, etc. I think that's a very natural thing that happens in the crypto world, but also in any frontier tech world where it becomes clear what a future vision can look like. It doesn't necessarily become clear how that is going to happen. Typically, you get this wave of like infrastructure building where people are like, I want to build that end state thing, but I can't. Why can't I? It's because this doesn't exist. I'm going to build this, and then everything else can happen. And so everyone starts to build this. The world gets a view of that vision, gets excited about it, so it kind of starts to look at it. But it takes a long time to build infrastructure properly. I think the time to build the infrastructure properly is longer than human attention span, which results in this like weird graph as you typically see with technology, right? And I think we're just in that graph right now where actually a bunch of us have been building infrastructure for a good number of years now. It's getting ready to go to market. The problem is along the way, as we've talked about it, people have got very excited, not seen it happen 12 months after and thought, oh, I guess it was all a lie, when in reality, it just takes longer than that to build it. And so I think we're going to see a big wave of decentralized AI adoption at the infrastructure level. I don't think any of us have a perfect, or obviously none of us have a perfect view of what exactly that adoption is going to look like. But my intuition is, back to my other point, that it will look like a lot of machine usage rather than human usage. And it will look like interesting things that a centralized provider could not do rather than us just going and competing directly with them on price.
That makes sense. Bailey, I want you to help us bring this all home, Bailey. What if this category never competes heads on, right? You're going to have a very neutral third person perspective to this. What if we stop, like the entire ecosystem stops positioning itself as an alternative and start actually positioning itself as a layer? Or is that a wrong outlook? What do you think, Bailey?
I think I 100% agree with that and with everything that Travis and Ben have said, that you don't want to position your decentralized AI product as a cheaper, slightly worse version of a centralized product, right? Because that's a terrible marketing. A lot of people are basically saying like, use my decentralized cloud. It only works on Tuesdays, but it's really freaking cheap. That's like not good marketing. You want to be able to present yourself as doing something that your competitors cannot do. And I think that's really important. And I think the reason why the three of us are on this podcast is because we are some of the projects that have figured out how to do this. We've come to this conclusion that we need to provide something unique to the industry. And I think that's really important. I think early on, like our value prop was the same, right? Like if you do your robotics data collection through a decentralized way, obviously you can cut out all of the middlemen and save money. But it quickly, after talking to real customers, they don't actually care about this. What they care about is getting quality data, good guarantees, good controllability, all of these services in order to make their foundation model training efficient, because they're burning $500,000 a year times 30 engineers waiting for that data to show up. And when we started bringing that to the table, that like, look, by leveraging the community, we can scale these scenarios against your prompts very organically and in a day instead of in weeks. That was something that was appealing to the customers. And ultimately, that's the product we offer and that's the product we sell, right? It's something that centralization has a lot of trouble doing, because the strengths of centralization are being able to coordinate a bunch of things and like do that one thing. But it's difficult to have diversity. It's difficult to have resiliency. And these are all things that we can offer. So I think that's the sort of situation that the three projects here have really nailed down. Like for Ambient, it's being able to provide these services with rate limits and openness and features that OpenAI will not give you. For Ben, it's being able to provide the sort of agent first compute model that might be more efficient or more effective. For us, it's being able to provide data which is higher quality, grows faster, and has more diverse scenarios. And these are all problems we've identified that centralized systems have a lot of trouble solving. But none of us are saying like, use our service, it's super cheap with no other qualifiers, right? Like that's terrible. Like very few successful companies go and make that success by saying, I've offered my competitor's product at half the price. Because what's that saying is like, either your product is bad and not worth as much, or you're like undercutting your own profit margins in order to get into the market, which is not really sustainable. Like it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah, like I just want to pile on here. I would say that, I agree and I also disagree a little bit. So, like to Bailey's comment, like, we meet people at a point of like mathematically guaranteed quality. Like if you're going to pay for inference, and you were going to do it from some random provider, you could have a random experience. And we want you to have a guaranteed good experience. And we're able to do something which centralized providers are not, going to Ben's point, which is that because we're providing that guarantee, we can then perform aggregation and scaling that other parties could not do without renting data center capacity from very particular data centers or building their own data centers. And so it provides a level of service and a self-healing, availability and reliability profile that is unique. But I also think that like we've been backed into this idea a little bit that we can't compete with players head on. I at least would like to shed that a little bit. I would like for some of us to go head to head, maybe not feature for feature, but in some very particular area with good marketing behind us and just absolutely trounce the closed, centralized alternatives. I don't think we can win all those battles, but I definitely think because of the unique characteristics that Bailey and Ben described, that actually we probably could win a few of them. And I think that would make a really positive impression on the market.
Yeah, definitely. We actually are thinking about going more head on against the big players in the robotics space. Like our project's ambitions are getting greater and greater as robotics gets more and more exciting. I think you're right? Like decentralization gives you a lot of inherent advantages, and then you can bring those advantages to bear while building out to a reasonable extent the rest of the stack. So for us, that means getting closer to the metal, working more on the foundation models themselves and not just the data services. And you don't have to like be 100% a match for everyone else, but you have to let your own advantages come to bear. You just can't be like horrifically worse.
I think that's the thing is it's figuring out again like what decentralization like uniquely gives you, right? Like and in some cases it will be a benefit, but in some cases it won't be a benefit, right? And I think we probably all as projects like earlier on have had this sort of messaging where we're like, I know we did at Gensyn where it was like, hey, look, compute will just be cheaper and that's it. And like we don't tell you any more details about like the genre of compute or the way that like machine learning is going to be done. And I think that kind of it does not make sense for us to do that general purpose head to head. What it does make sense for us to do is build for a specific and rapidly growing segment of very specific machine learning task-based compute, which actually, in our view, eclipses the rest of compute anyway. And so that's where we kind of focus, and we're uniquely able to do that because of some of the tech and because of some of the decentralized aspects. So frustratingly, it comes down to like it's sort of both the same thing, right? But ultimately, the message, I guess, for anyone kind of thinking of building with decentralization is there are a different set of costs to decentralization, and there are a different set of spiky benefits to decentralization. And the entire world has gone through this matching process of those things. And ultimately, it's almost like we're all doing like one big search process to find the places where actually that weirdly different shaped kind of jigsaw piece fits better than the current one that the centralized world has organically grown to. One of the things with the crypto space is there's a pessimism now that actually maybe those jigsaw pieces only fit within finance. I think obviously all of us here don't believe that that's the case. I think that's what played out first. It was the most obvious thing, which is why cryptocurrencies were the first thing built over like distributed consensus systems, because it's the clearest like use case. But I think it just takes time. It took a long time for that to get adopted. It takes a long time for us to figure out in other infrastructure areas where those like weirdly shaped jigsaw pieces are and where to apply them out into the market. And it isn't just like a perfect overlay where decentralized tech just like beats centralized on every single vector. Like it obviously doesn't. We're doing a like human-led search process, and that's unfortunately like frustratingly inefficient.